Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. I remember how the fire crackled that evening, casting jittery shadows across our campsite in the Aderandac Mountains. It was late June 2023, and at 16, I considered myself something of a wilderness expert. My parents were chatting with some neighbors from the adjacent campsite, swapping stories about fishing spots and the best ways to avoid encounters with wildlife. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, comforting scents that had accompanied every summer camping trip since I was 7. Jason sat across the fire from me, absently poking at the embers with a stick. We'd been friends since elementary school, bonded by our shared love of the outdoors. He caught my eye and raised an eyebrow, our silent signal. Despite the comfort of the campfire's glow, restlessness tugged at me. Our families would talk for hours, retelling the same stories they shared every year. Meanwhile, the forest beyond our tents beckoned with promise. "I'm getting another soda," I announced to no one in particular. My mother nodded without breaking her conversation. Jason stretched and mumbled something about needing to grab his jacket from his tent. Our midnight explorations had become tradition over the years. Quick adventures while our parents remained oblivious, believing us to be safely within the campground's boundaries. I was so sure of myself back then. 5 consecutive summers of camping had convinced me I knew all the forest's rhythms. Which animals emerged at dusk, which trails looped back to the main path, how far I could wander before risking disorientation. The darkness held no mystery I couldn't decode, or so I believed with the unearned confidence of adolescence. "Same route as yesterday?" Jason asked as we slipped past the row of tents at the edge of our campsite. "Let's go farther tonight," I suggested, feeling unusually bold. "I want to check out that ridge we saw during the hike." Jason hesitated. "That's pretty deep in, isn't it?" I shrugged, unwilling to admit that something about tonight felt different. The moon hung low and heavy, periodically vanishing behind drifting clouds. The forest beyond our tents seemed to absorb the darkness rather than merely exist within it, as though the trees themselves were pressing inward, contracting around our small pocket of civilization. A strange uneasiness nagged at me, but I refused to acknowledge it. Pride has always been my downfall. We stood at the perimeter of the campground, that invisible boundary between safety and adventure. The glow of multiple campfires dotted the clearing behind us, while ahead lay only shadow and mystery. Jason clicked on his flashlight, casting a narrow beam that barely penetrated the wall of trees. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice dropping to a whisper, though no one was near enough to hear. I nodded, ignoring the faint tremor that ran through me. "We've gone out at night dozens of times. What's different about tonight?" What was different? Something in the atmosphere, perhaps. The unusual stillness of the air, the absence of the typical forest ambiance. No cricket chorus, no distant owl hoots. Just a pressing silence that seemed to wait for something. "We'll just go to the first clearing and back," I promised, though I had no intention of cutting our adventure short. 30 minutes tops. Jason nodded, seemingly reassured. I led the way, stepping carefully over the border of small stones that marked the edge of the designated camping area. There's a certain electric thrill in leaving the secure glow of civilization and stepping into near-total darkness. The forest immediately enveloped us, and the temperature dropped several degrees. Twigs snapped beneath our shoes, each crack amplified in the unusual quiet. The smell of damp earth hung thick around us, carrying hints of decay and growth simultaneously. Usually we hovered around the outskirts, close enough to still glimpse the reassuring embers of our campfire through gaps in the foliage. But tonight, Some combination of boredom and bravado pushed us to test our boundaries. "Let's head toward that ridge," I suggested, pointing vaguely northeast. "Should take us 15 minutes to reach it." 15 minutes is already farther than we usually go," Jason remarked, but he followed without further protest. We moved deeper into the woodland, our flashlight beams bouncing erratically across twisted trunks and dense undergrowth. The familiar trails gradually gave way to less trodden paths. With each step, the campground's ambient sounds, distant laughter, muted conversations, the occasional bark of someone's dog, faded into nothingness. "We should mark our trail," Jason suggested after several minutes of silent walking. "Break some branches or something." I laughed, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. "What are we? Children in a fairy tale? We know these woods." The confidence in my voice didn't quite match the growing uneasiness in my gut. Something felt wrong, not just different but fundamentally wrong, about the forest tonight. Yet pride prevented me from admitting it, even to myself. The farther we ventured, the more oppressive the quiet became. You'd expect a forest at night to buzz with life, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, the symphony of insects, the whisper of leaves stirred by the gentlest breeze. But this silence had weight and presence. It filled my head and pressed against my eardrums, making every tiny sound, the crunch of damp leaves, the crack of a twig, the whisper of fabric as Jason shifted beside me, seem intrusive and jarring. We exchanged nervous grins that did nothing to mask the tension building between us. Both of us found ourselves scanning the spaces between trees, eyes straining to make sense of the shifting shadows. After 20 minutes of walking, I realized we had penetrated much deeper into the forest than ever before. The terrain had changed subtly. More rocks underfoot, thicker underbrush, trees growing closer together. I glanced back, hoping to catch some reassuring glimpse of our campsite, some distant flicker of firelight. There was nothing but blackness stretching in all directions. "Hey," Jason whispered, his voice tight. "Do you know which way is back?" "Of course," I lied, pointing with false confidence. "We've been walking pretty much in a straight line. Camp is that way." Jason didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. Neither of us wanted to admit we might have made a mistake. That's when I first heard it. What sounded like a voice, so faint I almost convinced myself it was imagination. Like someone whispering a secret directly behind me. The words indistinct, but the cadence unmistakably human. My body tensed instantly. Jason must have noticed my reaction because he snapped his flashlight beam toward me. "What's wrong?" "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Hear what?" I shook my head, unwilling to articulate what I'd heard. "Nothing. Probably just the wind." Jason swept his flashlight in a wide arc, the bright beam tearing through the darkness around us. We both spun slowly, scanning the surrounding forest for anything. But there were only trees, twisted, knotted trunks rising from the forest floor like ancient sentries. Fallen branches, dense patches of ferns. No figures, no faces. I told myself I was overreacting. It must have been a trick of the wind rustling through dry leaves. Except there was no wind that night. The air remained thick and still, unusually heavy for a summer evening. We hovered there in uneasy silence, our ragged breathing embarrassingly loud. Finally, we turned our flashlights off again, stubborn pride reasserting itself. This was supposed to be our tradition, our adventure. If we gave up every time the woods spooked us, we wouldn't be half as tough as we pretended to be. Still, we picked up our pace, silently agreeing we'd gone far enough for one night. I tried to laugh it off, calling myself a baby, but the joke fell flat. Jason didn't respond, just kept glancing behind us as though expecting something to lunge from the shadows at any moment. Another whisper drifted through the darkness. This time it was clearer. Something almost like syllables forming words. No discernible meaning, just raw sound like a half-formed sentence cut short. My pulse throbbed in my ears, drowning out everything except that faint, persistent murmuring. We froze simultaneously, not daring to move. Fear warred with curiosity in my mind. Part of me wanted to bolt back toward what I hoped was the direction of camp. Another part, the stubborn, prideful part, refused to show fear, especially in front of Jason. "Someone else from the campground?" Jason suggested, his voice cracking slightly. I shook my head. Nobody comes out this far. For the first time, I realized with stark clarity that if we'd misjudged where we were, we could be genuinely lost. There's a particular panic that rises when you don't know if safety is just beyond the next tree or miles away across unfamiliar terrain. It starts as a tightness in your chest and spreads outward, making your fingertips tingle and your throat constrict. I nudged Jason with my elbow. Without a word, we turned back the way we believed we had come. We wanted desperately to believe we were still in familiar territory, but everything looked different in the dark. Every knotted trunk seemed like an unfamiliar face, every shifting shadow a hidden threat. The air felt charged with strange energy, sending waves of goosebumps up my arms despite the summer warmth. Then came a jolt of realization. We weren't hearing nighttime critters or a breeze stirring leaves. Something was out here, making those sounds. Something with a voice. And it didn't feel like a wandering camper singing off-key or whispering to a friend. It sounded wrong. The cadence was off, the timbre unnatural, as though someone had forgotten how human speech was supposed to sound. We walked faster, our earlier bravado evaporating with each step. My flashlight quivered in my grip, its beam dancing erratically across the forest floor. Each footfall crackled over fallen branches and dried leaves, broadcasting our presence to whatever might be listening. Jason locked eyes with me, and in that glance I saw the same mix of fear and stubborn determination I felt. We weren't about to break into a panicked run, not yet. But deep down, I think both of us wanted to. Branches scraped against our arms, snagging our sleeves and leaving thin scratches across exposed skin. The hush of the forest turned oppressive, as if every living thing was collectively holding back, watching our progress with silent interest. Just when I thought my nerves couldn't stretch any tighter, another whisper sliced through the silence. It was close, so close I almost felt breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, but saw only darkness. Jason and I stopped dead in our tracks. We exchanged a look that all but screamed, "This is enough." We had no clue what was lurking out here, but it wasn't something we wanted to meet. We switched on our flashlights without hesitation this time, sweeping the beams over the undergrowth and between the trees. My mouth felt parched, my throat tight with fear. I just wanted to see a familiar landmark, anything to reassure me we were on the right path home. But the light revealed only more trees, more endless darkness stretching in all directions. No sign of the main trail, no glimpse of distant campfires. Nothing but forest. A swell of dread rose in me. It wasn't just about being lost anymore. It was the sinking sense that something was out here, moving just out of sight, watching us stumble blindly through its domain. "I think we need to head west," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The campground should be that way." "How do you know which way is west?" Jason demanded, panic edging into his tone. I didn't. I was guessing, desperately trying to maintain some illusion of control over the situation. I grabbed Jason's arm and pulled him forward in the direction that felt right. We both knew we had to keep moving, had to find our way back to our campsite's warm glow, where maybe we could laugh this off in the safety of flickering firelight. But a deep part of me knew that even if we managed to find our way home, the night wouldn't let us off so easily. Something had changed, and the forest wasn't about to let us forget how vulnerable we truly were. By the time Jason and I decided we couldn't push our luck any further, the darkness around us felt almost suffocating. We forced ourselves to keep moving toward what we hoped was the way back, every step echoing like a beacon announcing our presence. The quiet we'd been half ignoring earlier now felt unsettlingly total. Even though there were two of us, I couldn't help feeling like a lone trespasser in a place where humans didn't belong. I raised my flashlight, heart pounding against my ribs. Something flickered across the edge of its beam. A shape hunched in the undergrowth about 20 yards ahead. In that split second, every instinct shouted to turn around and run, but my feet stayed rooted to the spot. Jason caught sight of it too, and his grip tightened on my arm until I could feel fingernails digging into my skin. Neither of us spoke. We just stared as the figure crawled, almost slithered through a patch of dead leaves. Ragged clothes clung to the form, dark tattered cloth streaked with mud and what might have been blood. At first, I couldn't decide if it was human or animal. The posture seemed wrong, too low to the ground, too fluid in its movements. A muffled voice reached my ears. Words tumbled out, though they were strange and half-formed, almost as if the speaker had forgotten how language was supposed to work. Disjointed phrases, fragments of sentences that made no immediate sense. Jason flicked his flashlight higher, illuminating the person's face. It was a woman, perhaps in her 30s, her features pinched with fear or delirium. Dirt smeared her cheeks and forehead, and her hair stuck out in clumps, tangled with leaves and small twigs. She looked at us with wide, frantic eyes that reflected our flashlight beams like those of a cornered animal. I stood there, too stunned to move. The woman pulled herself upright, swaying dangerously, and mumbled something about finding her campsite. There was a desperation in her voice that felt all wrong this far into the woods at this hour. "Please," she said, the word clear among the garbled phrases. "Can't find my way back." Part of me wanted to back away. Everything about her presence set off internal alarms. She shouldn't be here, alone in the darkness crawling through the underbrush. But she looked helpless in a way that couldn't be ignored. Lost, confused, possibly injured. Jason and I exchanged glances, and even though terror still coursed through me, I knew we had to do something. We couldn't leave her out here, not in this state. "We're heading back to the campground," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "You can come with us." "Your campsite?" "Which one?" Jason asked. "Site 47, she mumbled. "By the lake path." I knew that area. It was on the opposite side of the campground from our site, near where the more serious partiers tended to gather. We offered to guide her back, and she mumbled what might have been a yes. Without warning, she lurched forward, wobbling like she might collapse at any second. I stepped in to keep her from tumbling into a thorny bush, and Jason moved to her other side. That close, I noticed an odd chemical smell on her breath. Alcohol, certainly, but something else too. Sharper, more medicinal. Her eyes darted around as if searching for something lurking in the shadows. I found myself following her gaze, half expecting to see shapes moving between the trees. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to establish some normalcy. "Vera," she said after a long pause, as if she'd had to search her memory for the answer. "I'm Jason, and this is," Jason began. "We need to go," Vera interrupted, suddenly urgent. "They're still out here." A chill ran through me. "Who's still out here?" She didn't answer, just pulled at my arm with surprising strength. We set off in a slow, awkward shuffle, each of us supporting Vera by an elbow. The journey back felt endless. Every few steps she would stumble or change direction abruptly, forcing us to adjust our grip to keep her upright. Every so often she'd mutter disjointed phrases, a name I didn't recognize, a random number, a broken sentence that trailed off into nothing. Once she stopped altogether, her body going rigid as she scanned the dark spaces between the trees as if convinced somebody else was out there. I found myself scanning too, imagining shapes slipping between trunks just out of sight. Twigs snapped beneath our feet, but I still half suspected we weren't the only ones moving through the forest that night. "Someone's following us," Vera whispered, her voice suddenly clear. "Been following me all night." "There's nobody out here but us," Jason said, though he didn't sound convinced. Vera let out a gasp at one point, jerking backwards so violently that I nearly lost my grip on her arm. For a moment, I feared she'd bolt back into the darkness, vanishing among the trees before we could stop her. Jason and I tightened our hold, urging her to keep moving. "It's okay," I said, not believing my own words. "We're almost back." The forest pressed in on us, a maze of silhouetted branches and wet leaves that crushed underfoot. Despite our flashlights, the trail was hard to follow, if we were even on a trail at all. I found myself squinting ahead, searching for even the faintest glow from the campgrounds. Vera's weight grew heavier against me as she seemed to lose what little coordination she had left. Her mumbling became more frequent, more urgent, punctuated by sharp intakes of breath whenever a sound emerged from the darkness around us. Eventually, after what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, the tree line began to thin. Through gaps in the foliage, I caught glimpses of a dull orange flicker, a campfire in the distance. Relief surged through me, but it was laced with lingering unease, like stepping into a safe zone while still expecting trouble to pounce from behind. "Almost there?" Jason said, his voice tight with exhaustion and residual fear. Vera nodded weakly, her steps becoming marginally more coordinated as we approached civilization. The whispers that had haunted us deeper in the forest seemed to recede, replaced by distant human voices and the occasional burst of laughter from the campground ahead. When we finally staggered out of the woods, we found ourselves near campsite 47, just as Vera had indicated. A group of 4 people sat around a smoldering fire pit, beer cans glinting in the dying light. They glanced our way with expressions as disoriented as Vera herself appeared. One of them, a heavy-set man with a patchy beard, recognized her and came stumbling forward. "Where'd you wander off to?" he slurred, grabbing her arm roughly. "Been gone for fucking ever." They seemed clueless about how long she'd been missing or how far into the woods she'd gone. My friend and I could barely wrap our heads around their nonchalance, considering how close she'd come to being lost for good. "She was pretty far out," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Crawling around in the dirt." The man shrugged. "She does that sometimes when she's had a few too many. Gets these, ideas in her head." Another member of their group, a woman with dyed blonde hair, approached and helped guide Vera to a log by their dying fire. "Thanks for bringing her back," she said with more sincerity than the man had shown. "She wandered off after we finished a bottle of whiskey, probably looking for a place to pee and got turned around." We helped Vera sit down, and the group thanked us in that half-dazed, unbothered way of people who'd been drinking heavily. No questions about the unnerving trek through pitch-black woods, or the bizarre ramblings she'd uttered along the path. Just a casual shrug of relief, like it was no big deal. Jason and I stepped away, still rattled by everything we'd experienced. The tension from that search in the dark clung to us, and everything about our own campsite, our families chatting, the warm flicker of our own fire, now felt like a haven we'd taken for granted. We walked back in near silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The woods seemed calmer here, maybe because the camp was so close, but I caught myself glancing behind me, expecting to see some other figure staggering out of the shadows. Even safe in the ring of familiar tents and hushed conversation, a part of me stayed on edge. I knew I wouldn't sleep soundly that night, maybe not for the rest of the trip. Our families asked if we had fun on our walk, and we fed them some half-truths. We weren't ready to relive the details, and they probably wouldn't have believed how terrifying the whole thing had felt. Later, when I tried to rest in my sleeping bag, I kept picturing Vera's dirt-streaked face and the haunted look she'd given the trees around us. I wondered what she'd really been running from out there, what she thought was following her. Had it been purely alcohol-induced paranoia, or had she sensed something in those woods that we'd only glimpsed the edges of? In some dark corner of my imagination, I swore there were whispers still drifting through the night air, calling out in the silent forest, waiting for the next pair of unsuspecting kids brave or foolish enough to venture too far off the beaten path. 3 years have passed since that night, but I've never gone camping again. Jason and I don't talk about what happened, though sometimes I catch him looking over his shoulder when we walk through the park at dusk. Some experiences change you permanently, rewiring your instincts and perceptions. I've tried to convince myself that Vera was just an intoxicated woman who wandered too far from her campsite. That the whispers were just the wind or my imagination working overtime. That the feeling of being watched was nothing more than ordinary fear amplified by darkness and unfamiliar surroundings. But on quiet nights when I'm alone, I can still hear those whispers, not quite human, not quite animal, calling from somewhere deep in the recesses of my memory. And I know, with absolute certainty, that something was out there in the forest that night. Something that remains nameless. Something that waits. I've always found solace in the outdoors. From the time I was a teenager in the mid-1990s, something about the crisp air and the isolation from urban chaos drew me in like a magnet. Now, at 42, I've logged hundreds of nights under the stars, from quick weekend getaways to week-long expeditions through some of the most remote areas this side of the Mississippi. My grandfather taught me the basics when I was 12, how to build a fire in the rain, spot animal tracks, and navigate without technology. Those skills became second nature, and the woods became my sanctuary. That changed 3 years ago. What I'm about to share isn't easy. I've replayed these events countless times, scrutinizing each detail, wondering if I missed something crucial. The rational part of my brain continues to search for logical explanations, but the primal part, the part that recognizes danger before we consciously process it, remains unconvinced. My wife Julia doesn't like to discuss what happened. She's a practical woman, a high school science teacher with an analytical mind. Yet even she can't explain everything we experienced. We've been married 15 years, and I've never seen her truly frightened until that first trip. Our anniversary fell on a long weekend in October 2022. We decided to celebrate at Black Ridge State Forest, a sprawling wilderness area about 3 hours from our home in Vermont. It wasn't our first choice. We'd originally planned to visit my brother in Colorado, but budget constraints and Julia's school schedule forced us to stay closer to home. The forecast predicted mild temperatures and partly cloudy skies. Perfect camping weather. I'd packed extra layers, knowing how quickly autumn temperatures can drop after sunset, especially in higher elevations. We arrived at the ranger station around noon on Friday, signed the visitor log, and obtained our backcountry permit. "Planning to stay near Aspen Creek?" the ranger asked, circling an area on our map. "Actually, we were hoping to reach Jack Pine Ridge," I replied. "I've heard it's less crowded." The ranger's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He cleared his throat. "It's beautiful up there, but the access road got washed out in last month's storms. You'd need to hike in about 4 miles from the nearest parking area." Julia gave me a questioning look. We'd planned a relaxing weekend, not a strenuous trek with full packs. "What about the northern section?" I asked, pointing to another area on the map. "Old Growth Loop?" "That could work. It's quieter than Aspen Creek and the road's in decent shape. Just keep an eye on the weather. Sometimes storms roll in fast this time of year." We thanked him and headed out, following his directions along a narrow gravel road that wound through increasingly dense forest. The drive felt peaceful, with occasional glimpses of wildlife. A fox darting across the path, a hawk circling overhead. As we penetrated deeper into the forest, cell service vanished, and the radio signal deteriorated into static. "This is exactly what we needed," Julia said, gazing out the window at the towering pines. "A complete disconnect." I nodded in agreement, though something about the ranger's hesitation lingered in my mind. Had there been a warning in his tone when he mentioned Jack Pine Ridge? Or was I projecting my own unease onto an innocent conversation? We reached the designated parking area around 2 p.m. Only one other vehicle occupied the small clearing, an older model pickup truck with local plates. The air felt unusually still as we stepped out of our SUV. No breeze rustled the leaves, no birds called from the branches above. Just a thick, oppressive silence that seemed to absorb every sound we made. "It's so quiet," Julia whispered, almost reluctantly, as if speaking at normal volume might disturb something. I nodded, hoisting my pack onto my shoulders. Probably just the time of day. Animals tend to be less active in the afternoon. We consulted our map one final time before setting off along a faint trail that snaked between ancient trees. The path gradually ascended, leading us deeper into the forest. After about 40 minutes of hiking, we reached a small clearing that offered a perfect campsite. Level ground, a natural rock formation that would block wind, and enough open sky to view the stars later. As we began setting up our tent, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Several times I paused to scan the surrounding trees, but nothing appeared out of place. Just endless trunks stretching into deepening shadows. "Everything okay?" Julia asked, noticing my distraction. "Just taking in the scenery," I lied, forcing a smile. By the time we finished establishing our camp, the first hints of evening approached. The temperature began its expected decline, and the previously still air stirred with a faint breeze. I gathered kindling for our fire while Julia organized our cooking supplies. That's when I noticed the first oddity. A series of shallow depressions in the soft earth near the edge of our clearing. They resembled footprints, but not quite human and not quite animal. The pattern seemed erratic, as if whatever made them had been moving in confused circles. I almost called Julia over to look, but thought better of it. Why start our weekend with unnecessary concerns? Instead, I dragged a fallen branch across the marks, effectively erasing them from view. As dusk settled over the forest, we prepared a simple dinner of dehydrated chili and cornbread. The flames from our small fire cast dancing shadows across the clearing, creating an illusion of movement in the peripheral vision. We talked about mundane things, work stress, home renovation plans, an upcoming visit from Julia's parents. Normal conversation that helped mask the growing unease that had settled in my gut. Around 9 p.m., the wind began to intensify. What had started as a gentle breeze transformed into gusts that rocked the upper branches of the surrounding pines. The sky, which had been relatively clear upon our arrival, now darkened with rapidly moving clouds. "Weather changing faster than expected," I commented, securing loose items around our campsite. Julia glanced upward, concern etching lines across her forehead. "Should we pack up? Head back to the car?" I checked my watch. "It's getting pretty dark for hiking out. Let's wait and see if it passes. Our tent is rated for tough conditions." In retrospect, that decision marked the beginning of everything that followed. Had we left then, perhaps the subsequent events would never have occurred. But hindsight offers little comfort when confronting the inexplicable. The wind accelerated with alarming speed. Within an hour, it howled through the canopy with such force that the entire forest seemed to groan in protest. We retreated to our tent, abandoning the fire pit to the mercy of the elements. Inside, we arranged our sleeping bags and settled in for what promised to be a tumultuous night. "I've never heard wind like this," Julia said, her voice barely audible above the roar outside. "It sounds deliberate." I knew exactly what she meant. There was a rhythmic quality to the gusts, almost like breathing. Inhale, exhale, pause, repeat. Each cycle grew more intense than the last. "It's just the way it's channeling through the ridge," I explained, though I wasn't convinced by my own reasoning. Wind can create strange acoustic effects in forests. Julia nodded but pulled her sleeping bag tighter around her shoulders. We lay side by side, listening to the escalating tempest. The tent fabric flapped violently, and our aluminum poles flexed to dangerous limits. Rain began to fall, first as scattered drops, then as a torrential downpour that drummed against the rainfly with machine gun intensity. At approximately 11:30 p.m., the first tree fell. The crack reverberated through the ground beneath us, a deep splintering sound followed by a tremendous crash that shook the earth. Julia grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "That was close," she whispered. "Too close," I agreed, fumbling for my flashlight. The storm's ferocity increased with each passing minute. Wind gusts bent our tent almost flat against the ground before releasing it to spring back into shape. The rain transformed into hail, pelting our shelter with ice pellets that sounded like thrown gravel. Beneath this cacophony of natural forces, another sound emerged, something distinctly out of place. Methodical, deliberate footsteps circling our tent. At first I thought it might be fallen branches rolling across the ground, pushed by the wind. But the pattern was too consistent, too intentional. "Do you hear that?" Julia whispered, her eyes wide in the dim light of our lantern. I nodded, placing a finger to my lips. The footsteps paused directly outside our tent door. For several heart-stopping seconds, nothing moved. Then, slowly, a shadow fell across the fabric, the distinct silhouette of something standing just inches away. Julia stifled a gasp, and I instinctively positioned myself between her and the tent entrance. We remained frozen, barely breathing, as the shadow lingered. The lantern flickered, threatening to extinguish and plunge us into complete darkness. Another tree crashed nearby, and the shadow vanished. The footsteps resumed, circling once more before fading into the storm's chaos. Neither of us spoke. Words seemed inadequate for what we'd just witnessed. Throughout the night, trees continued to fall. Each thunderous crash brought fresh adrenaline surging through my veins. Sleep became impossible. We sat huddled together, counting the seconds between lightning flashes and thunder booms, tracking the storm's progression. Around 3 a.m., the wind ceased with such abruptness that the sudden silence felt more alarming than the preceding hours of tumult. The rain tapered to a gentle patter, and the forest grew unnaturally still once more. "Is it over?" Julia asked, her voice hoarse from tension. "I think so," I replied, though uncertainty colored my words. We waited another hour before daring to peek outside. Dawn approached, casting a grayish light over a landscape transformed by destruction. Fallen trees lay scattered around our clearing like massive pickup sticks. Branches, leaves, and pine needles carpeted the ground. Somehow, miraculously, our tent had survived intact, protected by the very rock formation that had initially attracted us to the site. As Julia surveyed the damage, I walked the perimeter of our camp, ostensibly checking for hazards, but actually searching for evidence of our nighttime visitor. The rain had washed away most surface marks, but near a particularly dense thicket, I found what I was looking for: a set of fresh impressions in the mud. They matched the pattern I'd seen and covered up the previous evening, only these were deeper, more clearly defined. They weren't human footprints. Of that, I was certain. The shape was wrong, too elongated, with unusual spacing between what might have been toes. Yet they weren't clearly identifiable as any animal I recognized either. They led away from our camp, disappearing into the underbrush. I photographed them with my phone before rejoining Julia. She was already packing up our gear, her movements quick and efficient. "We need to get out of here," she said without looking up. Before anything else happens. I couldn't have agreed more. We dismantled our camp in record time, stuffing equipment haphazardly into our packs with little regard for organization. Every few minutes I'd scan the tree line, half expecting to glimpse whatever had stalked our tent during the night. The hike back to our vehicle proved challenging. Fallen trees blocked the trail in several places, forcing us to create detours through dense undergrowth. By the time we reached the parking area, our clothes were soaked with sweat and caked with mud. The pickup truck we'd noticed upon arrival was gone. As we drove away from Black Ridge Forest, neither of us spoke about what we'd experienced. It wasn't until we crossed back into cell service range that Julia finally broke the silence. "I don't want to go back there," she said simply. "Ever." I nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "We won't." But even as I made that promise, something gnawed at me. A morbid curiosity about what exactly had transpired in those woods. What had circled our tent with such deliberate purpose? What had created those strange tracks? And why did I feel, with unsettling certainty, that our experience was somehow incomplete? Merely the opening chapter of a longer, darker narrative. For 6 months following the Black Ridge incident, I avoided camping altogether. Julia and I never discussed the details of that night, though I often caught her staring into space, her thoughts clearly back in those woods. The photos I'd taken of the strange footprints remained on my phone, untouched and unshared. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, melting away the winter snow and my lingering apprehension. The call of the wilderness grew stronger with each passing day, until I could no longer resist its pull. But I knew Julia wouldn't join me, not after what we'd experienced. Instead, I reached out to my longtime friend Wesley, an experienced outdoorsman who'd spent years as a forest ranger before transitioning to environmental consulting. "Been too long since we've hit the trails," I said during our phone conversation, carefully omitting any mention of Black Ridge. "Agreed," Wesley replied enthusiastically. "Any particular destination in mind?" I hesitated, then suggested Pinecrest Valley, a lesser-known area approximately 4 hours west of our hometown. According to online forums, it featured several primitive campsites accessible only by four-wheel drive vehicles, perfect for those seeking genuine isolation. Wesley agreed to the plan, and we set a date for mid-May 2023. I told Julia it would be a straightforward weekend trip, nothing adventurous. She nodded absently, her focus on grading final exams, but I detected relief in her eyes at not being invited along. The designated weekend arrived with clear skies and moderate temperatures. Wesley and I loaded his rugged Jeep Wrangler with enough supplies for 3 days, including emergency equipment that far exceeded typical requirements. I'd become paranoid about preparedness since Black Ridge. "Planning for the apocalypse?" Wesley joked, eyeing my extensive first aid kit and satellite messenger device. "Just being thorough," I replied with a forced smile. We departed early Saturday morning, reaching the outskirts of Pinecrest Valley by midday. The final approach required navigating an increasingly deteriorated service road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Wesley navigated the obstacles with practiced skill, guiding the Jeep over washed-out sections and around fallen debris. "Almost there," he announced after an hour of careful driving. "Should be a clearing just ahead, according to the map." Sure enough, the trees parted to reveal a small meadow bordered by towering firs and a rocky outcropping. The remnants of an old campground were visible: 2 weathered picnic tables, a dented metal fire ring, and the dilapidated structures Wesley and I would later identify as outhouses. "Perfect," I said, surveying the area. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here in ages." Wesley nodded in agreement as he parked the Jeep. That's the beauty of these forgotten spots. No weekend warriors, no RVs, no noise. We unloaded our gear and began establishing camp. The afternoon passed pleasantly enough, with Wesley collecting firewood while I set up our tents on opposite sides of the clearing. The weather remained cooperative, with only the occasional cloud drifting across the otherwise blue sky. As evening approached, Wesley suggested exploring our immediate surroundings before darkness fell. We followed a faint trail that led from the clearing toward what sounded like running water. After about 15 minutes of hiking, we discovered a small stream cascading over moss-covered rocks, the perfect source for filtered drinking water. "This place is pristine," Wesley remarked, filling his water bottle. "Hard to believe it's been abandoned." I murmured agreement while scanning the forest around us. Unlike at Black Ridge, nothing felt overtly threatening here. The birds sang normally, small animals rustled in the underbrush, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine resin. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, something felt slightly off-kilter, a subtle wrongness I couldn't precisely define. We returned to camp as dusk descended, building a modest fire and preparing a dinner of grilled sausages and instant potatoes. Wesley shared stories from his ranger days, including encounters with bears, lost hikers, and the occasional marijuana operation hidden deep in protected forests. "People underestimate how vast these wilderness areas truly are," he said, poking at the fire with a stick. "You could hide almost anything out here, and chances are it would never be found." The comment sent an involuntary shiver down my back. "Speaking of hidden things," I said, attempting to sound casual, "I need to use the facilities. Which outhouse did you check earlier?" Wesley gestured toward the structures at the far edge of the clearing. "I used the one on the right. The left one seemed a bit sketchy, door barely hanging on its hinges." I nodded and grabbed my flashlight, making my way across the darkened campsite toward the outhouses. They were typical backcountry constructions, simple wooden boxes perched over deep pits with rudimentary doors for privacy. The right-hand structure, as Wesley had indicated, appeared marginally more stable than its companion. After finishing my business, curiosity drew me toward the left outhouse. Something about Wesley's casual dismissal of it as sketchy piqued my interest. I approached cautiously, playing my flashlight beam across its weathered exterior. The door hung at an awkward angle, one hinge completely separated from the frame. I hesitated, then pulled the door open with a protesting creak. The smell that greeted me wasn't the expected outhouse stench, but something mustier, like old canvas and dust. My flashlight illuminated the interior, revealing a startling sight that momentarily stopped my breathing. 3 enormous backpacks leaned against the rear wall, partially obscuring the toilet seat. They weren't casual day packs, but serious expedition gear, the kind designed for multi-week wilderness treks. A light coating of dust suggested they'd been there for some time, yet not long enough to suffer significant deterioration from exposure. I stepped closer, examining them without touching. 2 appeared to contain standard camping equipment. I could make out the shapes of sleeping bags, cooking utensils, and what looked like clothing through partially open zippers. The 3rd backpack, however, was the true anomaly. It was filled to capacity with Skittles candy packages. Every pocket, every compartment contained nothing but colorful Skittles bags in various sizes and flavors: original, tropical, sour, berry. Some packages were unopened, others partially consumed with the tops rolled down. The sheer volume was staggering and utterly bizarre. I backed out of the outhouse, closing the door as quietly as possible. Wesley looked up from the fire as I returned, his expression questioning. "You were gone a while. Everything okay?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. "You need to see what's in that left outhouse." Wesley's eyebrows rose, but he stood without comment and followed me back across the clearing. I held the flashlight as he cautiously opened the door and peered inside. "What the hell?" he muttered, stepping into the small space for a closer look. "Why would someone leave their gear like this? And what's with all the candy?" I shook my head. "No idea. But it feels wrong, doesn't it? Like we've stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to find." Wesley examined the backpacks more thoroughly than I had, carefully checking pockets and compartments without disturbing their positions. No identification that I can see. No electronics either, no phones, GPS devices, nothing. How long do you think they've been here? I asked. Based on the dust and condition, I'd guess a few months, possibly since last fall. He frowned, tapping the Skittles-filled pack with his knuckle. This makes no sense. Who needs this much candy on a camping trip? Maybe it's not about need, I suggested. Maybe it's about something else entirely. We returned to our campfire, both lost in thought about our discovery. The woods around us suddenly seemed less welcoming, as if the backpacks represented some unspoken threat lurking in the darkness beyond our fire's glow. Should we report it? I asked finally. Wesley considered the question. To whom? We're miles from the nearest ranger station, and I'm not sure this qualifies as an emergency. Bizarre, yes. Criminal? Probably not. What if someone's missing? What if those packs belong to hikers who never made it out? There would be a record of that, Wesley replied, his ranger background evident in his reasoning. Search parties would have combed these areas if hikers were reported missing. And they wouldn't have stopped searching until they found something conclusive. His logic made sense, yet it failed to quell my growing unease. We agreed to stay the night and reassess in the morning. Neither of us mentioned leaving early, but the thought clearly crossed both our minds. Sleep came fitfully that night. Every rustle in the underbrush, every distant owl hoot jolted me to alertness. Around 2 a.m., I distinctly heard what sounded like whispering voices just beyond the perimeter of our camp. The murmuring continued for several minutes, too consistent to be wind or animal sounds, yet too indistinct to make out specific words. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, straining to interpret the sounds. Were they coming closer? Was someone, or something, approaching our tents? Just as I gathered the courage to unzip my sleeping bag and investigate, the whispering stopped abruptly. The ensuing silence felt even more threatening than the mysterious sounds had been. Morning arrived with welcome sunlight streaming through the trees. Wesley emerged from his tent looking as tired as I felt. "Did you hear anything strange last night?" I asked hesitantly. His expression tightened. Like whispering. "Yeah, I heard it. Thought I was imagining things." We exchanged troubled glances, the confirmation of shared experience somehow more disturbing than the event itself. By unspoken mutual agreement, we began packing up our camp immediately after a hasty breakfast. As we loaded the Jeep, I glanced repeatedly toward the outhouse containing the mysterious backpacks. Something about them tugged at my consciousness, as if they represented a puzzle piece I couldn't yet fit into place. "We're leaving them there," Wesley said firmly, noting my distraction. "Whatever story they're part of, I don't think we want to know the ending." I nodded reluctantly. He was right, of course. Taking the packs would feel like theft, or worse, like inviting whatever strangeness surrounded them to follow us home. Before departing, we secured the outhouse door as best we could with a length of paracord from Wesley's supplies. It wasn't much, but it might deter casual discovery by the next visitors to this forgotten campsite. The journey back to civilization passed mostly in silence, each of us processing what we'd experienced. Only when we reached the main highway did Wesley finally address the elephant in the room. "I've been camping my entire life," he said, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I've seen bear attacks, flash floods, and forest fires. But this was different. Wrong somehow." I found myself nodding. Like we glimpsed the edge of something larger. Something we weren't meant to see. Exactly. Wesley tapped his fingers nervously on the steering wheel. "And I can't shake the feeling that it might not be finished with us yet." Those words haunted me during the drive home, echoing in my mind as I greeted Julia and deflected her questions about the trip with vague assurances that everything had gone well. That night, I dreamed of whispering voices and endless forests filled with abandoned possessions, their owners nowhere to be found. Another year passed before I ventured into the wilderness again. The Black Ridge storm and the Pinecrest backpacks had carved deep furrows of doubt into my once unwavering love of the outdoors. Wesley and I remained friends, but tacitly avoided discussing our strange experience. Julia seemed relieved by my diminished enthusiasm for camping, though she never directly referenced her own trauma from that windswept night. By June 2024, however, the pull of nature had strengthened once more. Work stress mounted, with my architectural firm facing impossible deadlines and demanding clients. Home offered little respite, as Julia's parents had moved in temporarily following her father's hip replacement surgery. The walls seemed to close in a little more each day, until the thought of open spaces and solitude became an obsession rather than a preference. I decided on a solo overnight trip, just me and my German Shepherd, Rusty. A simple excursion to clear my head and reconnect with the outdoors on my own terms. I selected a location carefully, Meadow Creek Trail, a well-traveled path in a state park, less than 2 hours from home. Popular enough to feel safe, yet with sufficient space between designated campsites to provide the isolation I craved. Julia raised an eyebrow when I mentioned my plans, but offered no objection. "Take the satellite messenger," was her only comment. I promised I would, grateful for her understanding. The drive to Meadow Creek passed quickly. Arriving mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, I found the trailhead parking area nearly empty. Just 2 other vehicles occupied the gravel lot. Perfect. I shouldered my pack, attached Rusty's leash, and set off along the well-maintained trail. After approximately 2 miles of hiking, I veered off onto a less defined side path that led toward a small stream indicated on my map. Another half-mile brought me to an ideal campsite, a flat area sheltered by mature oak trees, with the stream gurgling nearby. The site showed signs of previous use, a crude fire ring constructed from stones, flattened areas where tents had stood, but no evidence of recent visitors. I established a simple camp, opting for a minimalist tarp shelter rather than a full tent. This arrangement would allow me to observe the night sky while still having protection if weather conditions changed. Rusty explored our surroundings with his nose to the ground, occasionally freezing to point at various animal scents. As evening approached, I prepared a straightforward meal on my backpacking stove. The simple routine of camping tasks felt comfortingly familiar, almost enough to override the wariness I'd carried since previous expeditions. Almost, but not quite. I found myself constantly scanning the tree line, jumping at unexpected sounds, and keeping Rusty close at hand. Twilight deepened into dusk. I lit a small fire more for its psychological comfort than practical necessity. Rusty settled at my feet, occasionally lifting his head to track sounds beyond human perception. The crackle of burning wood and the stream's gentle murmur created a peaceful soundtrack, complemented by the distant calls of whippoorwills and the sporadic rustling of nocturnal creatures. For the first time in months, I felt my muscles truly relax. The tension headache that had become my constant companion gradually receded. I leaned back against my pack, gazing upward as stars emerged in the darkening sky. Perhaps I'd overreacted to those previous experiences. Perhaps they were merely unusual occurrences with perfectly rational explanations that my imagination had distorted into something more sinister. That comforting rationalization lasted precisely until 10:43 p.m. The first indication of trouble came from Rusty. His body stiffened beside me, ears forward, a low growl building in his throat. I sat up, instantly alert, and scanned our surroundings. Nothing appeared unusual in the flickering firelight. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Raccoon? Fox?" Rusty's growl intensified, and he rose to a standing position, facing northwest toward the denser section of forest. I followed his gaze but saw only shadows between tree trunks. Then I heard it, the distant roar of an engine, growing steadily louder. Vehicle headlights appeared between trees, bouncing wildly as whatever conveyance they were attached to navigated rough terrain. The engine sound intensified, accompanied now by human voices. Loud, boisterous, clearly inebriated. I instinctively dimmed my lantern and kicked dirt onto the fire, reducing its visibility. A truck, I could now identify the vehicle type, crashed through the underbrush approximately 200 yards from my position. It stopped in what must have been a clearing, though I couldn't see it directly through the intervening trees. The headlights remained on, illuminating what looked like swirling dust and pollen in their beams. 4 male voices carried through the night air, their words indistinguishable, but their tone unmistakably aggressive and excited. Rusty pressed against my leg, his growl now silent but his body vibrating with tension. The sharp crack of a gunshot shattered the night. I flinched violently, automatically dropping to a crouch and pulling Rusty down with me. Another shot followed quickly, then a third. Raucous laughter erupted after each report. Target practice, I muttered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. Just drunk idiots shooting at cans or something. But the rational explanation did little to ease my fear. Intoxicated individuals with firearms represented a serious danger, especially when firing randomly in the darkness. A stray bullet could travel significant distances through the woods. My previously perfect campsite now felt terribly exposed. More gunshots rang out, accompanied by whoops and hollers. The men seemed to be taking turns, each trying to outdo the others in some competition. Glass shattered. They were apparently shooting bottles, and the celebrating voices grew louder. I had to make a decision. Staying put risked accidental injury from their reckless behavior. Approaching them to request they stop seemed equally dangerous. Confronting armed, intoxicated strangers in the darkness rarely ends well. The only reasonable option was to retreat, to put significant distance between myself and their impromptu shooting range. I quickly packed essential items: wallet, keys, phone, water bottle, flashlight, into a small day pack. Attaching Rusty's leash securely to my belt, I shouldered the pack and began moving quietly away from my camp, leaving the bulkier equipment behind. I could retrieve it in the morning, assuming these unwelcome visitors departed overnight. We moved carefully through the forest, using only the dimmest setting on my flashlight to navigate. Each gunshot jolted my nerves anew, though they gradually grew fainter as we increased our distance from the source. Rusty remained vigilant, occasionally stopping to listen intently before proceeding. After approximately 40 minutes of methodical hiking, we reached a service road, not the main trail I'd used earlier, but a maintenance path used by park staff. It offered easier traveling than the dense underbrush we'd been traversing. I consulted my map and determined we were heading roughly northeast, eventually intersecting with the park's boundary road. The gunfire had faded to distant pops by this point, but another sensation replaced my fear of stray bullets, the distinct feeling of being followed. Nothing tangible justified this impression. No snapping twigs, no shadowy figures glimpsed in peripheral vision. Just an overwhelming certainty that something tracked our progress through the darkness. Rusty sensed it too. He kept looking back, hackles raised, occasionally stopping completely to stare into the darkness behind us. Each time I would strain to see what captured his attention, but the flashlight beam revealed only empty forest. We continued along the service road for another hour, eventually reaching a junction with a wider gravel path. According to my map, this should lead directly to a secondary parking area approximately 1 mile from our current position. Relief flooded through me at the prospect of reaching civilization, or at least the relative safety of my vehicle. That relief evaporated instantly when Rusty suddenly lunged forward, barking furiously at something in the tree line ahead. I raised my flashlight, illuminating what appeared to be a human figure standing motionless between 2 massive oak trees. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there?" No response came. The figure remained perfectly still, just beyond the range where my flashlight could provide clear details. It appeared human-shaped, but somehow wrong. Proportions slightly off, posture unnatural. "Park ranger." I tried again, taking a hesitant step forward. The figure moved suddenly, darting deeper into the woods with unnatural speed. Within seconds, it vanished completely, leaving no trace of its presence. Rusty continued barking, straining against his leash toward the spot where it had stood. I stood frozen, heart hammering against my ribs. What had I just seen? A person? An animal standing upright? Or merely a trick of light and shadow combined with my heightened anxiety? No time to analyze. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to reach open spaces and light and other people. I tugged Rusty's leash, urging him to continue along the gravel path. He complied reluctantly, still growling softly and glancing repeatedly toward the woods. We finally reached the secondary parking area around 1:30 a.m. Unlike the main lot, this one featured solar-powered security lights that cast a reassuring glow over the empty gravel expanse. Not a single vehicle occupied the space, unsurprising given the hour and weekday timing. My own car waited at the primary trailhead, still approximately 3 miles distant via connecting trails. Under normal circumstances, I might have made camp here and continued in daylight. But nothing about this night felt normal, and the thought of stopping, of being vulnerable once more to whatever lurked in those woods, was unbearable. We continued hiking, following the well-marked connecting trail between parking areas. The relative openness of this main path provided some comfort, though shadows still loomed ominously on either side. Rusty remained vigilant, responding to sounds and scents imperceptible to my human senses. When we finally reached my vehicle at 3:15 a.m., exhaustion had nearly overtaken fear. I unlocked the car with trembling hands, helped Rusty into the back seat, and collapsed behind the steering wheel. For several minutes, I simply sat breathing deeply, processing what had transpired. The rational explanation: I had encountered some intoxicated hunters or target shooters, followed by a deer or other wildlife that my stressed mind had misinterpreted as a human figure. My previous experiences at Black Ridge and Pinerest had predisposed me to see threats where none existed. This was the logical conclusion. Yet logic failed to account for Rusty's reaction. German shepherds know the difference between humans and wildlife. His behavior indicated something genuinely threatening, something that triggered his protective instincts. As I started the engine and began the drive home, a disturbing thought emerged. What if these incidents weren't isolated? What if some connection existed between the windstorm at Black Ridge, the abandoned backpacks at Pinerest, and tonight's encounter? 3 separate locations, 3 distinct experiences, yet all sharing an underlying current of wrongness that defied rational explanation. The headlights illuminated empty roads stretching before me, but my mind remained back in those dark woods, wondering what exactly had watched us flee and whether it was somehow linked to my previous encounters. Most troubling of all was the certainty that I would eventually return to the wilderness, drawn by the same inexplicable compulsion that kept bringing me back, despite the mounting evidence that something out there was aware of my presence. Something that perhaps had been watching me all along. I arrived home shortly after dawn, exhausted but too wired for sleep. Julia was already awake, preparing coffee before her early morning classes. She took one look at my haggard appearance and Rusty's still alert demeanor and knew immediately that something had gone wrong. "What happened?" she asked, setting aside her mug. For the first time since Black Ridge, I told her everything, not just about the previous night's events, but also the strange backpacks at Pinerest that I'd mentioned only vaguely before. She listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled as my narrative unfolded. "I think they're connected," I concluded, cradling my own coffee cup and shaking hands. "All 3 incidents. I can't explain how or why, but there's a pattern forming." Julia remained silent for several moments, processing my words. As a science teacher, she naturally gravitated toward rational explanations, yet I could see her struggling to find one that adequately addressed all elements of my experiences. "Have you considered reporting any of this?" she finally asked. I laughed humorlessly. "And say what exactly?" "Officer, I keep having weird experiences while camping. They dismiss me as paranoid or attention-seeking." "Maybe not," she countered. "The backpacks at least represent tangible evidence. Abandoned property in a remote location could indicate missing persons." Her suggestion had merit, though I'd already discussed this possibility with Wesley after the Pinerest incident. Still, combined with the other experiences, perhaps it warranted official attention. Later that morning, after Julia departed for school, I contacted the local police department. The dispatcher transferred me to a detective named Russell, who listened patiently to my abbreviated account of finding the backpacks. "When exactly was this discovery made?" he asked, his tone professional but skeptical. "May of last year," I admitted, immediately recognizing how this undermined the urgency of my report. "And you're only reporting it now because—" I struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't sound absurd. "I've had subsequent experiences that made me reconsider its significance." A long pause followed. "Sir, without specific information about individuals in danger, there's little we can act on here. If you'd like to file a formal report about the abandoned property, you're welcome to come to the station." I thanked him and ended the call, knowing I wouldn't follow through. How could I explain my growing conviction that something extraordinary was occurring in our region's forests? Even I recognized how irrational it sounded, despite having experienced it firsthand. For the next several days, I immersed myself in research, seeking similar accounts from other outdoor enthusiasts. Online forums and social media groups dedicated to hiking and camping yielded occasional stories of unexplained phenomena in wilderness settings. Strange sounds, unusual tracks, inexplicable feelings of being watched. Most were dismissed by commenters as wildlife encounters, overactive imaginations, or deliberate fabrications for attention. One thread, however, caught my attention. A hiker described finding a collection of children's toys arranged in a geometric pattern deep in a national forest, miles from any trail or access point. The toys weren't weathered or damaged, suggesting recent placement. No children had been reported missing in the area. The arrangement was methodical, intentional, clearly human-made, yet serving no discernible purpose. The comments followed the expected pattern of skepticism and rational explanations. But one response, from a user identified only as Ranger 17, stood out. "These markers appear across different wilderness areas. They're not isolated incidents. Most go unreported or unnoticed. Records exist but aren't public. Some of us have been tracking patterns for years. Location data welcome. DM for secure contact." I stared at those words for a long time, my pulse quickening. Here was potential validation. Someone else who recognized what I was experiencing as part of a broader phenomenon. I immediately sent a private message detailing my 3 incidents, including precise GPS coordinates for the Black Ridge and Pinerest locations. The response came 3 days later. "Your experiences fit established patterns, not coincidental, not imaginary. Occur primarily in forests with old growth components or historical significance. Average 3-7 encounters before escalation. Recommend cessation of solo wilderness activities. Documentation valuable but secondary to personal safety. Will share additional information if you remain uninvolved hereafter." That final sentence struck me as both warning and challenge. Remain uninvolved, as if continuation would constitute active participation in whatever strange phenomenon I'd encountered. The message confirmed my suspicions while simultaneously raising dozens of new questions. What constituted escalation? What historical significance linked my 3 locations? Who was Ranger 17, and how had they accumulated this knowledge? I drafted several replies but sent none. What could I ask that wouldn't sound desperate or obsessive? How could I extract more information without revealing the growing compulsion I felt to understand these experiences? The truth was, despite the fear and confusion, part of me wanted to go back. Not to the same locations, but somewhere similar. Somewhere I might encounter whatever presence lurked in those forests. The rational portion of my brain recognized this impulse as potentially dangerous, even self-destructive. Yet it persisted, a nagging curiosity that whispered continuously from the recesses of my consciousness. July arrived with oppressive heat and humidity. Julia traveled to a 2-week educational conference in Chicago, leaving me alone with Rusty and my increasingly troubled thoughts. I threw myself into work, accepting additional projects that required long hours and intense concentration, anything to distract from the wilderness's siren call. On the third night of Julia's absence, the dreams began. They always started identically. I would find myself standing at the edge of a dense forest as evening approached. The trees before me were ancient, their massive trunks disappearing into canopy shadows. No particular landmarks identified the location, yet it felt intimately familiar, as if I'd visited countless times before. A path led into the woods, barely visible among ferns and underbrush. Despite my dream self's reluctance, my feet would inevitably carry me forward, step by hesitant step, into deepening darkness. The forest closed around me, branches creating a tunnel that permitted only the occasional glimpse of darkening sky overhead. As I progressed deeper along the path, awareness of being observed intensified. Eyes tracked my movement from beyond the trees. Not animal eyes, but something with intelligence and purpose. The sensation was identical to what I'd experienced during my actual wilderness encounters. Eventually, the path would open into a small clearing dominated by a single massive tree at its center. The tree's species varied from dream to dream, sometimes an ancient oak, sometimes a towering pine, occasionally something unidentifiable with oddly shaped leaves. But its presence always conveyed the same message: arrival at a destination. At this point in each dream, the observing presence would emerge from behind the central tree. It never fully revealed itself, remaining partially obscured by trunk or shadow. I could discern only fragments: an elongated limb, a suggestion of height exceeding normal human proportions, occasionally a face that seemed almost but not quite human. And then it would speak, not with audible words but directly into my mind. The content varied nightly, but the essence remained consistent. You've seen the signs. You felt our presence. The forest has marked you. Return to complete what began at Blackridge. I would awaken immediately after this communication, drenched in sweat despite the air conditioning. Heart racing so violently, I feared cardiac arrest. Rusty always sensed my distress, pressing against me and whining softly until my breathing normalized. After the 5th consecutive night of this dream, I contacted Wesley. We hadn't spoken about Pinerest since our return, maintaining the unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. His response to my text was immediate. Meet me at Carlton's, 7 p.m. Come alone. Carlton's was a quiet pub on the outskirts of town, known for its subdued atmosphere and private booths. I arrived early and secured a corner table far from other patrons. Wesley appeared precisely at 7, sliding into the seat opposite me with a nod of greeting. You look terrible, he observed after ordering drinks. Haven't been sleeping well, I admitted. Because of the dreams. It wasn't a question. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. How did you know? Wesley glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. Because I've been having them too, since Pinerest. Not every night, but regularly. Always the same basic scenario: forest, path, clearing, tree, and the entity behind it. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by renewed fear. If Wesley experienced the same dreams, this wasn't merely psychological aftermath from strange encounters. Something more was happening. something that transcended normal explanation. "What does it say to you?" I asked quietly. "That I'm needed. That we both are. That we've been chosen for something." He paused as our drinks arrived, waiting until the server departed before continuing. "But there's more. I've been researching similar incidents, strange wilderness encounters, unexplained phenomena in remote forests. They're not random. They cluster in certain regions, around specific types of locations." I told him about Ranger 17's message, and he nodded as if expecting this information. "There are others tracking these events. Some are former Rangers like me, others are researchers. A few are people who've had experiences similar to ours. They communicate carefully, stay under the radar. Information is compartmentalized, shared only when necessary." "Why all the secrecy?" I asked. Wesley took a long sip of his drink before answering. "Because previous attempts to investigate openly have ended badly. People disappeared. Research was confiscated. Official denials issued. Whatever this is, someone, or something, doesn't want it widely known." The implications chilled me. "Are you saying there's a cover-up? Some government conspiracy?" "I'm saying I don't know exactly what we're dealing with. But I do know it's real, it's purposeful, and it's escalating." He leaned forward, lowering his voice further. "The dreams aren't random. They're communication. Invitation or warning, I'm not sure which. But they're leading towards something significant. The entity in my dreams specifically mentions Black Ridge," I said. "It says I need to return there to complete something that began during that first incident." Wesley's expression darkened. "Mine references Pinerest. Same basic message. Unfinished business. Need to return. I've been resisting the urge, but it's getting stronger." We sat in silence for several minutes, each processing the implications of our shared experience. Finally, Wesley spoke again. "We have two options. We can ignore the dreams, avoid the forests, try to resume normal lives and hope whatever this is eventually loses interest in us. Or we can go back," I finished. "Confront it directly, discover what it wants. That's the choice, and we need to make it soon. The dreams are increasing in frequency and intensity, at least for me. I suspect it's the same for you." I nodded, unable to deny this observation. "What do you think we should do?" Wesley considered the question carefully. "I think ignoring it is temporary at best. These experiences, these dreams, they're targeted, deliberate. Whatever intelligence is behind them has invested significant effort in establishing contact. It won't simply give up if we try to disengage." "So we go back," I said, my voice barely audible. "We prepare thoroughly, document everything, establish communication protocols with trusted individuals who remain outside the forests. And yes, we return, not from foolish curiosity, but because ignoring this communication may ultimately prove more dangerous than acknowledging it." As our conversation concluded, a plan began forming. Cautious, methodical, designed to maximize safety while pursuing answers. We would go our separate ways initially, Wesley to Pinerest, I to Black Ridge, each following the specific summons we'd received. We would carry satellite messengers with emergency protocols established, check in with each other at predetermined intervals, and maintain detailed records of everything we observed. Driving home that night, I experienced a curious mixture of dread and anticipation. The decision to return felt simultaneously like surrender to an external force and reclamation of personal agency. Whatever awaited in those forests, facing it deliberately seemed preferably to the continued psychological siege of dreams and compulsions. I spent the following days preparing meticulously, gathering equipment, studying maps, establishing safety protocols. I told Julia nothing of these plans, knowing she would object strenuously. Her conference provided a convenient window of opportunity, though I recognized the moral questionability of this deception. As the designated date approached, the dreams intensified further. The entity behind the tree became more distinct, its messages more urgent. "Time grows short," it communicated. "The convergence approaches. Your presence is required at Black Ridge." The night before my planned departure, I dreamed of the clearing once more. But this time, the entity stepped fully into view, revealing its complete form for the first time. I jerked awake before my conscious mind could process what I'd seen, left only with fragmentary impressions: height, impossible proportions, features that shifted between recognizable and utterly alien, and a growing certainty that whatever awaited at Blackridge would irrevocably alter my understanding of reality itself. July 17th, 2024. The date burned in my consciousness as I loaded my vehicle before dawn, double-checking essential equipment while Rusty observed with concerned eyes. I'd arranged for a neighbor to care for him during my absence. This journey was too uncertain, too potentially dangerous to risk his safety. The previous night, Wesley and I had finalized our plans during a tense phone conversation. "Synchronized departures at 6 a.m. tomorrow," he'd instructed. "We'll reach our respective destinations approximately mid-afternoon, establish base camps, and maintain hourly radio contact until sundown. If either of us misses 2 consecutive check-ins, the other initiates emergency protocols immediately." "And if we both encounter something simultaneously?" I'd asked, the possibility weighing heavily. "Then our outside contact takes action." Wesley had arranged for a former colleague, another ex-ranger named Diane, to monitor our satellite tracker signals. If both stopped moving or disappeared entirely, she would alert authorities with our last known coordinates. As I navigated the familiar route toward Blackridge State Forest, anxiety and anticipation battled for dominance. The morning sky displayed ominous clouds gathering on the western horizon, not yet threatening but carrying the distinct possibility of afternoon storms. Appropriate atmospheric conditions, I thought grimly, considering my previous experience there. The drive passed in a blur of tense silence. I deliberately avoided radio or music, wanting my senses fully attuned to both external environment and internal reactions. Occasionally, my satellite phone chirped with messages from Wesley, confirming his progress toward Pinerest. I reached the Blackridge Ranger Station shortly after noon. Unlike my previous visit with Julia, I found the small wooden building locked and unattended, with a posted notice indicating reduced staffing due to budget constraints. A self-registration box contained permits for backcountry camping. I completed the necessary form, noting my intended campsite location near Old Growth Loop, the same area where Julia and I had experienced the windstorm. The access road remained unchanged, still winding through increasingly dense forest that seemed to swallow daylight. As I penetrated deeper into Blackridge territory, cell service predictably vanished, leaving only the satellite messenger as my connection to the outside world. I sent a brief update to Wesley. "Approaching destination. All normal so far." His response arrived minutes later. "Same here. Stay alert." The parking area near Old Growth Loop contained 3 vehicles. More company than I'd anticipated, but potentially reassuring if circumstances deteriorated. I gathered my equipment, securing a heavy pack containing supplies for 3 days, though I hoped answers would come sooner than that. The hike to our previous campsite proceeded without incident. The trail showed signs of regular use, with occasional boot prints in muddy sections indicating recent visitors. Birdsong accompanied my journey, along with the usual rustling of small mammals and underbrush. Nothing suggested the otherworldliness I'd experienced previously, just an ordinary forest on a summer afternoon. I reached the clearing around 2:30 p.m. The weather had deteriorated during my hike, with darker clouds gathering overhead and distant thunder grumbling from the west. Unlike my trip with Julia, no protective rock formation graced this site. I would be exposed to whatever atmospheric conditions developed. Setting up camp efficiently, I established a small tent, organized supplies for easy access, and created a rudimentary fire pit. The satellite messenger remained within reach at all times, its signal light blinking reassuringly. I contacted Wesley upon completion. "Camp established, weather deteriorating. No anomalous observations yet. His reply came promptly. Similar situation here. First subtle indicators of presence. Unusual silence. Birds departed. Stay vigilant. That message triggered heightened awareness. I scanned my surroundings more carefully, noting that indeed the birdsong had diminished since my arrival. Not complete silence, but a definite reduction in natural forest sounds. The wind stirred tree branches overhead, creating a whispering susurration that seemed almost language-like when I didn't focus directly on it. I completed my preparations as daylight began fading prematurely under the influence of the gathering storm. The air felt electrically charged, raising the hair on my arms despite the warm temperature. Beyond the clearing's edge, shadows deepened between tree trunks, creating the illusion of movement when viewed peripherally. At 6 p.m., I messaged Wesley again. Conditions intensifying, storm approaching. Definite sense of presence now. Minutes passed without response. I checked the messenger signal. Still active, still connected. I sent another message. Wesley, status update needed. Nothing. Concern building, I initiated our agreed emergency protocol, sending a coded message that would prompt Diane to begin monitoring our situation more actively. Just as I completed this transmission, Wesley's delayed response arrived. Something approaching camp. Not human. Multiple entities. Moving in coordinated pattern. Will attempt documentation. My pulse accelerated dramatically. Before I could respond, he sent another message. Stay where you are. Do not change locations. They're herding, not hunting. Positioning us deliberately. The implications chilled me despite the warm evening air. Whatever these phenomena represented, they appeared to be manipulating our movements, creating some predetermined configuration with Wesley at one point and me at another. For what purpose, I couldn't begin to guess. Thunder crashed overhead, much closer now. Fat raindrops began pattering against the forest canopy, gradually intensifying into a steady downpour. I retreated to my tent, leaving the entrance unzipped for maximum visibility of the clearing. At 7:12 p.m., the forest fell completely silent. Not gradually, not in the natural progression of animals seeking shelter from the storm. One moment, the normal background sounds of a forest in rainfall, water dripping, leaves rustling, distant wildlife calls. The next moment, absolute stillness except for the rain itself. My breath caught in my throat. This was identical to what had preceded the anomalous windstorm during my previous visit. I sent an urgent message to Wesley. Complete silence has begun, precisely as before. Advise. No response came. Lightning flashed, illuminating the clearing in stark white brilliance. In that frozen moment of illumination, I saw them, figures standing motionless at the forest's edge. Not just one or two, but a complete circle surrounding my clearing. The flash ended before I could process details, returning me to darkness with only the afterimage burned into my retinas. Thunder followed immediately, so powerful it vibrated through the ground beneath my tent. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped it. Another lightning flash revealed the figures had moved closer, now standing just within the clearing's perimeter. I activated the flashlight, sweeping its beam toward where I'd seen the nearest figure. Nothing appeared in the artificial illumination, just rain-soaked undergrowth and tree trunks. Yet when lightning flashed again, the figures remained clearly visible, now arranged in what appeared to be a geometric pattern across the clearing. Understanding crystallized with terrible clarity. These entities existed just outside normal perception, visible only in the liminal moment of lightning's illumination. My flashlight beam passed through their positions without revealing their presence. With shaking hands, I activated my phone's camera. If I couldn't see them continuously, perhaps I could capture their image. I waited for the next lightning flash, then rapidly took multiple photos in succession. Another message arrived from Wesley. They've encircled my position. visible only during lightning, attempting communication. That last phrase shot adrenaline through my system. Communication? How? I typed hurriedly. What method? Verbal? Physical? His response came after an agonizing delay. Mental impression. Direct. Non-linguistic, but translatable. They're indicating something about convergence points. Energy nexus. You and I positioned at critical junctions. As I absorbed these words, the storm's intensity increased dramatically. Wind that had been merely gusty transformed into a roaring force that bent trees to dangerous angles. Rain fell in horizontal sheets, pummeling my tent with such force that I feared structural failure. Lightning flashed continuously now, providing sustained glimpses of the figures, which had arranged themselves in 2 concentric circles around my position. In one extended flash, I finally observed details I'd missed previously. The entities possessed humanoid structure, but with disturbing differences. Elongated limbs with too many joints, torsos impossibly thin, heads that seemed to shift between forms when viewed directly. Most troubling was their movement. Not the smooth motion of living organisms, but staccato transitions between positions, as if they existed in fractured time. A message notification drew my attention back to the satellite device. They're conducting some form of ritual, energy harnessing. We are catalysts, not participants. Black Ridge and Pinerest are nodes in larger network. Previous visitors left altered, carrying energy signature. That's why we were drawn back. Completion of circuit. Wesley's assessment aligned with the sensations flooding through me. My skin tingled with electrical energy that had nothing to do with the storm. The air inside my tent seemed to thicken, becoming viscous around my limbs. Each breath required conscious effort, as if oxygen itself had transformed into something not quite suitable for human lungs. Another message appeared. Don't resist. Resistance intensifies effects. Allow process to complete. Easy for him to say, I thought desperately. My heart hammered against my ribs with such force I feared cardiac damage. My vision blurred at the edges, narrowing to a constricted field that pulsed in rhythm with the lightning. In what seemed like both an eternity and an instant, energy surged through the clearing. Not lightning. Something different. Something that emanated from the entities themselves. It flowed like water, like electricity, like something for which human language has no adequate comparison. It connected the figures in luminous lines, creating a complex geometric pattern with my tent at its center. And then it reached me. The sensation defies description. Imagine every cell in your body simultaneously disassembling and reassembling, but with slight alterations each time. Imagine consciousness stretched across multiple dimensions, fragmenting into countless perspectives that somehow remain unified. Imagine knowledge flooding your mind in volumes too vast for comprehension, leaving only impressions of concepts too alien for human understanding. I experienced all this and more in what objective time would measure as approximately 3 minutes. When awareness of normal reality returned, the storm had passed. Moonlight filtered through dispersing clouds, illuminating a clearing that showed no evidence of the entity's presence. My tent remained intact despite the tempest's fury. The forest had resumed its normal nighttime sounds, insects chirping, occasional owl calls, leaves rustling in gentle breeze. With trembling fingers, I checked my phone, scrolling through the photos I'd taken during lightning flashes. Nothing appeared in the images except empty clearing and rain-streaked darkness. No figures, no energy patterns, no evidence whatsoever of what I'd witnessed. A final message waited on the satellite device. Process complete. Transformation initiated. Return home. Effects will manifest gradually. We are changed, but not as they intended. Something intervened. Discussion required in person. Wesley's cryptic message offered more questions than answers, but one phrase resonated particularly. Not as they intended. Whatever ritual or process these entities had conducted, something had altered its outcome. Whether positively or negatively remained unclear. I spent that night in a state of hyper-awareness, unable to sleep despite profound exhaustion. Every forest sound registered with crystalline clarity. Colors appeared more vivid in the moonlight, with spectra visible beyond what I'd previously perceived. My thoughts moved with unusual fluidity, making connections between disparate concepts that would have eluded me before. At dawn, I dismantled my camp and began the hike back to my vehicle. The forest seemed simultaneously familiar and profoundly changed, not in physical appearance, but in the way I perceived it. Layers of reality I'd never noticed now revealed themselves in subtle ways. Patterns of energy flowed through tree roots beneath the soil. Information transferred between plants via networks invisible to normal human perception. The entire ecosystem functioned as a unified intelligence, aware of itself and every organism within its boundary. And it was aware of me, watching with billions of perspectives simultaneously. I reached my vehicle shortly after 10 a.m., finding a message from Wesley, waiting. Heading home. Meet at Carlton's tomorrow noon. Rest today. Allow integration. The drive back passed in a haze of new perceptions and racing thoughts. By the time I arrived home, exhaustion had overtaken the initial effects of whatever transformation had occurred. I collapsed into bed, falling immediately into dreams filled with geometric patterns, ancient forests, and entities that existed between moments of conventional time. I awoke 18 hours later with absolute clarity about one thing. Wesley and I had been changed fundamentally, and there was no going back to who we had been before. The wilderness had marked us, not as victims or even as chosen ones, but as unwitting participants in something vast and incomprehensible, something that connected Black Ridge, Pinerest, and countless other locations in a network older than human civilization. The final chapter of this strange narrative remained unwritten, but I knew with certainty that my experiences in the wilderness had only just begun. The meeting with Wesley at Carlton's pub confirmed my suspicions. He appeared physically unchanged, the same weathered face, the same cautious eyes, but something fundamental had shifted in his demeanor, in the way he processed and responded to the world around him. You feel it too, he said immediately, sliding into the booth across from me. Not a question, but a statement of observed fact. I nodded. Everything's more. Colors, sounds, connections between things, and dreams unlike anything before. Wesley glanced around the pub before leaning forward. I've spent the last 36 hours researching. There are accounts throughout history, across cultures, describing experiences similar to ours. Indigenous oral traditions speak of forest spirits that transform chosen individuals. Medieval European texts mention the changed ones who return from wilderness with expanded awareness. Modern reports document unexplained perceptual alterations following encounters in remote natural settings. What happened to us? I asked, though I suspected neither of us could fully answer that question. Based on the communications I received during the event, we experienced some form of energy transfer or consciousness modification. The entities at Pinerest and Black Ridge serve as conduits or facilitators for a process connected to the forest itself, or perhaps to something that uses forests as interface points with our reality. His explanation aligned with my own intuitive understanding, though putting these concepts into language felt like describing color to someone who had never experienced sight. You mentioned something intervened, I reminded him. That we were changed, but not as they intended. What did you mean? Wesley's expression darkened. During the height of the phenomenon, I perceived another presence. Not the entities surrounding us, but something else entirely. Something that intercepted or altered whatever energy was being channeled through us. I can't explain it precisely, but I received a distinct impression that the original purpose was subverted somehow. For better or worse. Unknown. He took a long drink from his water glass. But I suspect we'll discover the answer soon enough. These alterations to our perception aren't static. They're evolving, expanding. Each night, my dreams take me deeper into understanding that remains just beyond conscious grasp during waking hours. I described my own dreams, vast networks of light connecting specific locations across landscapes, pulses of energy flowing between nodes, ancient patterns repeated throughout natural systems. Wesley nodded in recognition. We're seeing the same thing from slightly different perspectives, he concluded. The question is, what are we meant to do with this awareness? That question hung between us, unanswerable, yet pressing. If our transformation served some purpose beyond mere alteration of consciousness, what actions were we now obligated or destined to perform? Our discussion continued for hours, comparing experiences, theories, and the limited historical precedents we'd uncovered. By the time we parted, we'd agreed to maintain regular contact, document our ongoing perceptual changes, and research additional locations that might serve as nodes in the network we'd glimpsed. Julia returned from her conference the following day, immediately noticing something different about me despite my attempts to appear unchanged. "What happened while I was gone?" she asked directly, studying my face with concern. "You look, I don't know, not quite yourself." I considered lying, manufacturing some story about stress or minor illness. But our relationship deserved better, and perhaps more importantly, I needed someone beyond Wesley to understand what was occurring. So I told her everything. The dreams that had plagued me since our Black Ridge experience, the online research that led me to Ranger 17, my return to the forest, and the inexplicable transformation that followed. I described the entities visible only during lightning flashes, the geometric patterns of energy, and the altered perceptions I now experienced continuously. To her credit, Julia listened without interruption, her expression shifting between concern, disbelief, and reluctant consideration. When I finished, she remained silent for several moments, processing everything I'd shared. "I believe that you believe this happened," she said finally, choosing her words with careful precision. "And I can't deny that something about you seems different. Your eyes, the way you move, even how you've been looking at ordinary objects around the house. Something has changed. But you don't believe my explanation," I concluded, unsurprised. "I'm a science teacher," she replied. "My first inclination is to seek rational explanations. Stress-induced hallucinations, perhaps some environmental toxin in that forest that affects neurological function, maybe even a minor stroke or other medical condition that's altered your perception." I nodded, acknowledging the reasonableness of her skepticism. "That said," she continued, "I was with you at Black Ridge. I felt that unnatural silence before the storm. I saw that shadow outside our tent, so I can't dismiss everything you're describing as purely imaginary." Her partial acceptance provided unexpected relief. I hadn't realized how much I needed validation from someone outside the experience itself, someone whose perception remained firmly anchored in conventional reality. "I want you to see a doctor," she added. "Not because I think you're crazy, but because some aspects of what you're describing could have medical causes we need to rule out." I agreed to this reasonable request, though I knew medical examination would reveal nothing physically wrong with me. Whatever had changed existed beyond the parameters of conventional medical understanding. The following weeks established a new pattern of existence. During daylight hours, I maintained the appearance of normalcy, attending work meetings, completing architectural drawings, engaging in routine conversations. But each activity now carried an additional layer of perception, a heightened awareness of underlying patterns and connections invisible to others. I could sense the emotional states of colleagues before they spoke. Building materials revealed their molecular structures to my enhanced perception. Urban environments displayed energy flows between structures, people, and natural elements that persisted despite concrete and steel barriers. Nights brought increasingly complex dreams, not just observations of the energy network I'd glimpsed at Black Ridge, but apparent instructions for interacting with it. Specific locations appeared repeatedly, coordinates burned into my dreaming consciousness with urgent intensity. Some were familiar: Black Ridge, Pinerest, Meadow Creek. Others represented places I'd never visited, scattered across the continental United States and beyond. Wesley experienced similar nocturnal guidance, as our regular communications confirmed. We began mapping these locations, searching for patterns in their geographic distribution. Gradually, a geometric structure emerged, nodes positioned at precise intervals, forming what appeared to be a vast circuit across the North American landscape. Medical examinations revealed nothing unusual beyond slightly elevated brainwave activity during sleep studies. Blood work, neurological assessments, and psychiatric evaluations all returned essentially normal results. The doctors found no physical cause for my reported perceptual changes, eventually suggesting stress management techniques and possible anxiety medication. I declined the latter, knowing pharmaceuticals would likely interfere with whatever process continued unfolding within my altered consciousness. Julia accepted the medical findings with visible relief, though her skepticism regarding my supernatural explanation remained firmly intact. By mid-August, the dreams had coalesced into unmistakable directives. 3 specific locations demanded attention: the original sites at Black Ridge and Pinerest, plus a 3rd location in northern Michigan called Whispering Pines Nature Preserve. Wesley and I needed to visit these sites simultaneously, performing specific actions at precisely coordinated moments to complete the circuit disrupted during our previous encounters. "It's too dangerous," Julia argued when I explained the necessity of this triplet expedition. "You have no idea what might happen if you follow these instructions from your dreams." "That's true," I acknowledged, "but I also don't know what might happen if we ignore them. These directives feel increasingly urgent, like a countdown to something significant." "That's exactly what worries me," she countered. "What if this something significant is harmful? What if these entities are manipulating you toward destructive ends?" Her concern was valid. Neither Wesley nor I could be certain of the ultimate purpose behind our transformation and subsequent guidance. The intervention he'd sensed during our separate rituals suggested competing agendas among whatever forces operated through these forest nodes. After extensive discussion, we developed a compromise approach. Wesley and I would visit our designated locations as instructed, but with substantial safety measures in place. A network of trusted individuals, including Julia, Wesley's ex-ranger colleague Diane, and a small group of others who'd experienced similar phenomena, would monitor our activities via satellite tracking and scheduled communications. Any deviation from established protocols would trigger immediate intervention. The date established by our dreams fell on the autumn equinox, September 22, 2024. The timing suggested significance beyond mere calendar designation, perhaps related to astronomical alignments that affected energy flows through the node network. Preparations consumed the weeks leading up to this date. We gathered specialized equipment based on dream instructions, crystals of specific mineral compositions, copper wire of particular gauge, instruments for measuring electromagnetic fluctuations. None of these items seemed inherently dangerous, which provided some reassurance regarding the intended outcome. As the equinox approached, my perceptual alterations intensified further. Ordinary objects occasionally appeared transparent, revealing internal structures normally hidden from view. Time periodically fluctuated, accelerating or slowing subjectively while clocks maintained their steady pace. Most dramatically, I began perceiving what seemed to be alternative versions of locations, glimpses of how spaces had appeared in the past or might appear in potential futures. Julia observed these episodes with increasing concern, particularly when I would suddenly stop mid-conversation, transfixed by perceptions invisible to her. "You look like you're seeing ghosts," she commented during one such moment. "Not ghosts," I corrected gently. Just different layers of what's always been here. The morning of September 22nd arrived clear and cool, perfect conditions for the tasks ahead. Wesley would return to Pinecrest while I journeyed back to Blackridge. A woman named Eleanor, who'd experienced her own wilderness transformation 3 years earlier, volunteered to complete our triad at Whispering Pines in Michigan. Julia embraced me tightly before my departure. "Come back," she whispered against my shoulder. "Not just physically. Come back fully to this reality." I promised to try, though uncertainty clouded that commitment. Whatever completion awaited at Blackridge might further transform my consciousness, rather than restoring it to conventional parameters. The drive to Blackridge passed in contemplative silence. Forests along the highway revealed their underlying energy networks to my enhanced perception. Root systems transmitting information, mycological webs connecting disparate organisms, subtle electromagnetic fields generated by living communities. By the time I reached the ranger station, ordinary physical reality seemed merely the outermost layer of a much deeper, more complex system. Unlike my previous visit, the station was staffed today. The ranger on duty, a middle-aged woman with knowing eyes, processed my permit request without comment, though something in her expression suggested recognition of what I represented. Had she encountered others like me before? Did she serve some role in the larger pattern? I considered asking directly, but decided against it. Some knowledge was best acquired through proper channels, not premature questioning. The hike to my designated location proceeded efficiently. Not the previous campsite near Old Growth Loop, but a different clearing approximately 1 mile further along the ridge, a spot that had featured prominently in recent dreams. I reached it by early afternoon, exactly as planned. The clearing itself appeared unremarkable to conventional perception, roughly circular, perhaps 40 feet in diameter, surrounded by mature eastern hemlock trees. But my enhanced senses revealed what others would miss. The clearing sat precisely at an intersection of multiple underground energy lines. The soil itself vibrated at a frequency just beyond normal human perception. The air contained higher concentrations of negatively charged ions than surrounding areas. Following dream instructions, I established a specific configuration of the items I'd brought. Copper wire arranged in geometric patterns, crystals positioned at precise intervals along these lines, measurement devices activated to record electromagnetic fluctuations. The entire setup, when viewed from above, would resemble a complex circuit board or perhaps an ancient magical sigil, depending on one's interpretive framework. As evening approached, I contacted Wesley and Eleanor via satellite messenger, confirming their parallel progress at their respective locations. All 3 sites were now prepared identically, awaiting only the final activation sequence scheduled for sunset. The appointed hour arrived with atmospheric perfection. Clear skies painted in spectacular oranges and pinks as the sun descended toward the horizon. I began the activation process exactly as instructed in my dreams. Specific crystals triggered in sequence, copper connections established one by one, verbal intonations at precise frequencies. As the final element clicked into place, the clearing transformed. Energy surged visibly through the copper pathways, illuminating the geometric pattern in pulsating blue-white light. The ground beneath my feet trembled, not violently but with purposeful vibration. The surrounding hemlocks swayed in perfect synchronization despite the absence of wind. And then they appeared. The entities from my previous encounter, now fully visible without need for lightning's illumination. They formed a circle around the clearing's perimeter, their elongated forms more clearly defined than before. I could now perceive that what had seemed like unusual proportions actually represented additional dimensional aspects that human perception normally filtered out. They weren't moving through our reality so much as intersecting with it, their true forms extending into spaces beyond conventional 3-dimensional understanding. One entity stepped forward, or perhaps more accurately, shifted the focus of its intersection with our dimensional plane. It communicated not through sound, but through direct mental impression. The circuit nears completion. 3 nodes activated simultaneously create the necessary triangulation. The intervention during previous attempt required this additional effort. I processed this information, forming a response as mental imagery rather than words. What is the purpose of this circuit? Balance restoration. The entity's communication carried complex conceptual weight beyond simple translation. Your species has severed connections between consciousness layers. This severance threatens stability of intersecting realities. We repair through human conduits who maintain physical presence in your dimensional expression. Another mental question: why us specifically? Compatibility factors, receptivity patterns, previous lifetime intersections. The entity shifted position slightly, its form rippling with colors beyond normal visual spectrum. You volunteered before embodiment, memory occluded by incarnation limitations. This revelation stunned me momentarily. Had Wesley, Eleanor, and I actually agreed to this role before birth? Did we carry some pre-existing connection to these entities or the work they performed? Before I could pursue this line of questioning, energy surged through the copper circuit with renewed intensity. The entity communicated with increased urgency. Full activation commences. Stabilize your consciousness pattern. Maintain focus on triangulation coordinates. I centered my awareness as instructed, visualizing the 3-point connection between Black Ridge Pinecrest and Whispering Pines. Energy flowed between these points, creating a triangular field that expanded beyond physical locations into some other dimensional aspect. What happened next defies adequate description in human language. The fabric of reality itself appeared to fold, creating a temporary aperture between dimensional planes. Through this opening flowed something that registered in my perception as both energy and information. Vast quantities of data encoded in patterns that rewrote portions of local reality structure. The entities surrounding my clearing channeled this flow, directing it through the copper circuits and crystal nodes I'd established. My own consciousness served as some form of translator or transformer, converting the incoming energy information into formats compatible with Earth's particular dimensional frequency. At the height of this process, I experienced direct communion with Wesley and Eleanor, despite our physical separation by hundreds of miles. Our 3 consciousnesses briefly merged, functioning as aspects of a unified awareness overseeing the entire operation. In that temporary union, I glimpsed the full magnitude of what we were participating in. A planetary healing process addressing damage inflicted by humanity's separation from natural systems and deeper reality structures. The circuit completion lasted approximately 17 minutes according to the monitoring equipment, though subjective experience suggested both much shorter and vastly longer durations simultaneously. As the energy flow gradually diminished, the dimensional aperture closed, the entities withdrew from their interactive formation, and normal perception reasserted itself within the clearing. But normal now incorporated far more than before. My already enhanced awareness had expanded exponentially. I perceived not just energy patterns and hidden connections, but the actual informational structure underlying physical reality. The forest around me existed simultaneously as matter, energy, information, and consciousness, all equally valid expressions of the same fundamental matrix. More significantly, I understood my role within this system with newfound clarity. The entities hadn't merely used us as passive conduits, they had activated dormant capacities within human consciousness that served crucial functions in maintaining reality coherence across dimensional interfaces. We weren't the first to undergo this activation, nor would we be the last. Throughout human history, individuals had been selected, transformed, and enlisted in this ongoing work, sometimes knowingly, often unknowingly. Indigenous shamans, religious mystics, inspired scientists, visionary artists. Many had been partially activated to perform aspects of the same function we now embodied more completely. As night fell fully over Black Ridge Forest, I gathered my equipment with movements that felt simultaneously familiar and entirely new. My body operated with heightened coordination, responding to thought with unprecedented precision. The copper circuits and crystals, having served their catalytic purpose, now appeared as ordinary objects once more, though I could still perceive the energetic imprints they carried. Messages from Wesley and Eleanor confirmed they had experienced parallel processes with similar outcomes. Our shared consciousness connection had diminished after the circuit's completion, but remained accessible with focused intention. We could communicate directly when necessary, though standard methods would suffice for routine coordination. I hiked back to my vehicle under a star-filled sky that revealed patterns invisible to conventional human perception. Cosmic energies connected directly to the forest network beneath my feet, the entire system pulsating with purposeful activity that had always existed beyond unaided awareness. The drive home unfolded through landscapes transformed by my expanded perception. Urban areas revealed themselves as complex energy systems interacting with natural patterns in both harmonious and discordant relationships. Human beings appeared as multidimensional entities temporarily focused in physical forms, their true nature extending far beyond bodily limitations. Julia waited anxiously on our front porch, her relief palpable as my car pulled into the driveway. She rushed forward as I emerged, then stopped abruptly several feet away, her expression shifting from welcome to uncertainty. "Your eyes," she whispered. "They're different." I smiled gently, understanding her discomfort. "Everything's different now. But I'm still me, Julia. Just more than before." She approached cautiously, studying my face in the porch light. What happened out there? How could I possibly explain what had transpired? What words could capture the dimensional interfaces, the reality restructuring, the activation of dormant consciousness functions? Even with my enhanced communication abilities, some experiences remained beyond language's capacity to convey. "I helped repair something broken," I said simply. "Something important for everyone, whether they know it or not." Julia touched my face hesitantly, as if verifying I remained physically present despite the obvious changes in my consciousness. "Will you stay? Here with me in this life we've built?" The question contained layers of meaning. Would I remain connected to conventional human experience despite my transformation? Would I continue participating in ordinary relationships and responsibilities? Or would my expanded awareness draw me away from such mundane concerns toward more esoteric pursuits? "I'll stay," I promised, embracing her gently. "That's part of the purpose. To bridge worlds, rather than abandon either." The entities showed me that integration serves the greater function better than separation. Relief softened her features, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "These entities, are they finished with you now? With Wesley and the others?" I shook my head slowly. "No. What happened today was just the first major circuit completion. There will be others at different locations, forming larger patterns over time. But we have breathing space between activation events, time to adjust, to understand, to prepare for subsequent phases." We entered our home together, the familiar space now overlaid with energy patterns and informational structures I hadn't perceived before my transformation. Our cats approached cautiously, sensing the changes in my auric field, but recognizing my essential identity beneath the alterations. That night, lying beside Julia in the darkness of our bedroom, I gazed through the ceiling into the star-filled sky beyond, perceiving connections between cosmic patterns and the subtle energies flowing through our home, our town, our planet. Everything connected in networks of meaning and purpose, operating according to principles that transcended random chance or mechanical causality. The wilderness had indeed changed me, initiating a transformation that continued unfolding with each passing day. But unlike the horror stories humans tell about such encounters, This change represented not corruption or destruction, but evolution. The activation of capacities long dormant in human consciousness, waiting for the precise conditions that would allow their expression. Julia slept peacefully beside me, her breathing steady and natural. Though she couldn't yet perceive what I now saw, something in her deeper awareness recognized and accepted the transformation's validity. Perhaps someday she too would experience activation, joining the growing network of awakened consciousness nodes scattered across the planet. Until then, I would serve as bridge between worlds, walking simultaneously in ordinary reality and the expanded awareness beyond it, translating between perspectives when necessary, contributing to the healing work that had only just begun. Outside our window, the night forest whispered in patterns both ancient and ever-changing, its consciousness intertwined with mine through connections that had always existed, waiting only for recognition to spring into active collaboration. 1 year has passed since the triangulation event at Black Ridge, Pinerest, and Whispering Pines. In that time, my perception has continued evolving, revealing layers of reality previously inaccessible to human consciousness. What began as enhanced sensory awareness has expanded into direct knowing, apprehension of information structures underlying physical manifestation. Wesley, Eleanor, and I maintain regular contact, comparing experiences and coordinating activities related to our ongoing role in the restoration process. We've identified 7 additional individuals who underwent similar transformations at different locations across North America, Europe, and Asia. Together, we form what might be described as a functioning circuit within the larger planetary system, human interfaces connecting dimensional expressions that would otherwise remain separated. Julia has adapted to my altered state with remarkable resilience, though she still perceives only glimpses of what I experience continuously. On rare occasions, usually during moments of deep connection between us, her awareness temporarily expands to include aspects of the enhanced perception I now take for granted. These brief windows into my reality have gradually eroded her skepticism, replacing it with cautious acceptance. I still don't understand it completely, she admitted during a recent conversation. But I've seen enough to know it's real. Not delusion or fantasy, but a genuine expansion of consciousness. My professional life continues, though with significant modifications. Architectural design now incorporates awareness of energy flows and information fields affecting human experience within built environments. My firm initially regarded these considerations with skepticism, but has gradually recognized their practical value in creating harmonious, functional spaces. Projects incorporating these principles consistently receive exceptional client feedback, often described in terms of feeling right or naturally comfortable, without clients understanding exactly why. The entities we encountered during our forest experiences maintain occasional communication, though less directly than during activation events. They exist primarily in dimensional expressions adjacent to our physical reality, intersecting with Earth's particular frequency band at specific locations, usually ancient forests, certain geological formations, or powerful water features. Their purpose remains consistent: repair and maintain connections between reality layers that human consciousness has primarily forgotten or deliberately severed. This separation wasn't inherently malevolent, but emerged as an evolutionary stage, a necessary period of differentiation allowing certain aspects of consciousness to develop independently before reintegration. The problem arose when this temporary separation calcified into apparent permanence, creating dysfunction within interconnected systems that require balanced information flow to maintain coherence. Our role as human interfaces serves this reintegration process. By maintaining physical presence in conventional reality while simultaneously accessing expanded awareness, we create bridges between dimensional expressions that allow necessary information transfer without disrupting established patterns too abruptly. The work continues in cycles, with intensive activation events interspersed with periods of integration and preparation. Each completion circuit expands the network of conscious connection, gradually reestablishing coherence across previously separated domains. The entities provide guidance regarding timing and methodology, but increasingly we understand these processes directly, requiring less external instruction. Last month, Wesley, Eleanor, and I participated in the second major triangulation event, activating nodes in Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico simultaneously. The energy transfer substantially exceeded our previous experience, suggesting progressive amplification as the network expands. 4 additional participants activated secondary nodes in surrounding states, creating a resonance field that stabilized and extended the primary triangulation effect. Following this activation, my perception expanded further, revealing what might be described as parallel probability streams, alternative expressions of reality that exist simultaneously within the same approximate space, but at different vibrational frequencies. These alternatives aren't separate worlds in the science fiction sense, but rather varied expressions of possibility within a unified field of consciousness. Most humans perceive only the particular probability stream their awareness has been conditioned to recognize, filtering out alternatives as effectively as we filter out certain wavelengths of light or sound. My activated perception now registers these multiple streams simultaneously, allowing conscious navigation between them under certain conditions. This capability explains phenomena long relegated to superstition or imagination. Prophetic dreams, déjà vu experiences, intuitive flashes, and synchronicities. These represent momentary slippages between probability streams, brief perceptions of alternative expressions normally filtered from awareness. The implications extend beyond individual experience to collective human development. As our network of activated consciousness expands, we're establishing conditions that will eventually allow larger segments of humanity to access these expanded perceptions naturally. Not everyone will experience full activation. Diversity of perception serves important functions within the larger system, but the rigid barriers between conventional and expanded awareness are gradually diminishing. Julia has begun documenting these changes from her unique perspective as intimate witness to transformation she doesn't fully share. Her background in science education provides valuable framework for translating these experiences into language accessible to those still operating exclusively within conventional perception parameters. "I'm trying to create a bridge," she explained when sharing early drafts of her manuscript. "Not everyone will undergo the kind of dramatic activation you experienced, but many are ready for expanded understanding if presented in familiar terms." Her work represents one aspect of the integration phase following major activation events, translating expanded perception into concepts recognizable within conventional reality structures. Others in our network perform similar functions through artistic expression, technological innovation, scientific research, and direct mentorship of individuals showing early signs of spontaneous activation. The entities approve of these translation efforts, recognizing that forced or premature expansion of consciousness often creates dysfunction rather than integration. Evolution proceeds most harmoniously when each system develops according to its inherent timing, while maintaining appropriate connections with larger structures. During recent communion with entity consciousness, I received clearer understanding of the historical context for current activation processes. Throughout Earth's developmental history, cycles of separation and reintegration have occurred repeatedly, each serving specific evolutionary functions. The current cycle began approximately 12,000 years ago with the emergence of agricultural civilization and attendant shifts in human relationship with natural systems. This period of separation allowed development of certain cognitive capacities, technological innovations, and social structures that will ultimately serve larger evolutionary purposes once properly reintegrated with aspects temporarily forgotten. The entities neither judge this separation as wrong nor idealize previous conditions as perfect. They simply facilitate necessary reconnection when appropriate developmental thresholds have been reached. We're now entering a critical phase in this reintegration process. The expansion of human technological capacity has accelerated to the point where it threatens systemic stability, if not balanced by corresponding expansion of consciousness. Our network serves as catalyst for this balancing, establishing patterns that larger population segments will eventually follow through natural resonance rather than artificial imposition. Last week, I returned to Black Ridge Forest, not for formal activation work, but personal communion with the specific energies present at my original transformation site. The forest welcomed me with familiar resonance, its consciousness recognizing mine instantly despite the year's absence. Sitting in the clearing where I'd first encountered the entities, I allowed my awareness to expand fully, perceiving the location across multiple dimensional expressions simultaneously. In one probability stream, the clearing remained unchanged from my last visit. In another, a massive tree had fallen during winter storms, creating new growth patterns in the suddenly sunlit understory. In yet another, human activity had expanded into this previously remote area, altering energy flows and relationship patterns. All these expressions existed simultaneously, each valid within its particular frequency range. My expanded perception encompassed them without contradiction or confusion, recognizing them as varied aspects of unified reality rather than competing versions requiring exclusionary choice. As twilight descended over the clearing, entity presence manifested more directly than usual outside formal activation events. Their communication carried congratulation and confirmation. Our work progressed according to appropriate patterns, with activation phases proceeding as needed despite adjustment requirements following the intervention during initial encounters. Intervention? I questioned, recalling Wesley's sensation of something altering the intended outcome during our separate forest experiences. The entity clarified. Competing consciousness expressions had attempted to direct activation energy toward purposes serving separation rather than integration. This intervention hadn't defeated the activation, but had necessitated additional triangulation events to establish proper connection patterns. The competing expressions weren't evil in human moral terms, but represented aspects still benefiting from continued separation phases. As darkness enveloped the forest, I perceived these competing expressions directly. Consciousness operating through dimensional interfaces similar to those our entities utilized but oriented toward maintaining or extending separation rather than facilitating integration. Their presence registered as discordant patterns within otherwise harmonious energy flows, creating interference that required compensatory adjustments within our activation network. This revelation expanded my understanding of our role significantly. We weren't simply repairing accidental damage to reality coherence, but participating in something more complex. A negotiated transition between evolutionary phases where different aspects legitimately served varied functions within the larger system. I shared this understanding with Wesley and Eleanor upon returning home, finding they had received similar clarification through their own communion experiences. Our network now adjusted operational parameters accordingly, recognizing that integration required appropriate timing rather than forced implementation against persistent separation patterns. Julia noticed the subtle shift in my perspective immediately. "Something's changed," she observed as I unpacked from the Black Ridge visit. "You seem, more settled somehow, less urgently driven." Her perception proved remarkably accurate. Understanding the larger context had indeed altered my relationship with the work, not diminishing commitment but transforming urgency into patient persistence. Evolution proceeded according to necessary timing, neither requiring nor benefiting from anxious acceleration. This morning, as summer sunlight streamed through our kitchen windows, Julia surprised me with an unexpected announcement. "I want to participate in the next activation event, not as observer or documentarian, but directly." The statement caught me momentarily speechless. Though Julia had gradually accepted the reality of my transformation, she had consistently maintained appropriate boundaries around her own direct involvement. "What changed?" I asked finally. She smiled, a complex expression containing both determination and vulnerability. "Dreams, mostly. For months now, I've been experiencing what you described before your first activation, specific locations appearing with increasing frequency and detail. Instructions that make no rational sense yet feel compelling and somehow familiar. I nodded, recognizing the pattern that preceded my own initial transformation. Have you identified the location? The timing? Northern Vermont, near the Canadian border, during the winter solstice. She hesitated before adding, I'm not the only one. 3 others without previous direct involvement have reported identical dreams focusing on the same region. This development aligned with information our network had recently received regarding the next major activation phase. 4 new primary nodes would establish connection during December, expanding the integration field substantially. Julia's inclusion represented an important transition, activation extending beyond those who had experienced initial forest encounters to individuals prepared through different pathways. The implications resonate beyond our immediate circle to broader human evolution. Consciousness activation is accelerating according to natural timing rather than artificial imposition. Those ready for expanded perception receive appropriate preparation through dreams, intuitive promptings, and synchronistic encounters. Others maintain conventional awareness longer, serving necessary functions within that expression, while reality streams gradually converge. As I complete this account of my experiences, autumn leaves dance outside my window in patterns revealing information transfer between trees preparing for seasonal transition. Birds flying south carry electromagnetic signatures that interact with Earth's field in precisely calibrated relationships. Cloud formations above the distant mountains encode data accessible to those with activated perception, while simultaneously serving atmospheric functions recognized by conventional science. Everything serves multiple purposes simultaneously across varied dimensional expressions. Nothing exists in isolation or functions through singular causality. The horror I initially experienced in those forest encounters represented simply the disorientation of consciousness expanding beyond accustomed limitations, fear arising not from external threat but internal resistance to transformation. The wilderness changed me, as it has changed countless others throughout human history. Not through malevolent intention or random accident, but through activation of capacities always present yet temporarily dormant during necessary phases of focused development. We stand at evolutionary threshold, individually and collectively. The forests know this. The entities facilitating transformation know this. And increasingly, humans with activated consciousness know this. Not as abstract theory or spiritual belief, but as direct perception of reality structures previously filtered from awareness. The integration continues, proceeding neither too quickly nor too slowly, but exactly as required by the complex, interconnected systems involved. Those ready for expanded perception receive necessary activation. Those requiring additional preparation within conventional parameters continue their development accordingly. And the forests wait, as they have always waited, simultaneously within and beyond time. Conscious participants in evolutionary processes that transcend human understanding while remaining intimately connected to human experience. I return to those forests regularly now, no longer seeking dramatic transformation, but quiet communion, with consciousness expressions that teach through resonance rather than language. Julia sometimes accompanies me, her perception gradually expanding through natural exposure rather than catalytic event. The horror of my initial encounters has transformed into profound appreciation for processes far more complex and purposeful than I originally understood. What seemed threatening or alien now reveals itself as necessary function within systems too vast for conventional human perception to encompass completely. And so we continue, walking between worlds that were never truly separate, translating between expressions that remain connected despite apparent divisions, serving integration that proceeds according to patterns established long before human consciousness emerged on this particular planetary expression. The wilderness changed me. And through that change, I discovered the wilderness was never truly outside us at all.